I love how participative you folks are.
Everyone is so happy.
For 3 in the afternoon, they're very happy. I'm super sleepy.
Session made them all happy, I guess. I was happy at the end of the session with the doggos and the cat was coming in.
That was Basanti. Archa's dog is very expressive. I think I am feeling it. Okay, so I think, Gargi, let's move ahead. Thank you so much, everyone, for replying. This shows that you're here. And yeah, okay.
Okay. We're going to begin with like a little sharing from me and then from Nandita and invite sharings from all of you about something I like to call the light bulb moment. And this is something I found in my research. A light bulb moment is a moment or a time when you realize that whatever you have been experiencing has been, I mean, you get to put a name on whatever you have been experiencing. And for ACE people, I'm talking about specifically for the purpose of this workshop, the moment when you found a name for your experience, and hopefully that the name was asexuality or some form of asexuality or something that comes under the umbrella term of asexuality. For example, when I was questioning and I didn't know what to call myself, and I only knew that something is different. And when I was reading up about asexuality, I didn't fit in the definitions of like just asexuality, which is because I mean, my experiences just did not seem to cover what was part of that definition. And so until I found the word gray asexuality, I was just stumbling about. And then I saw gray asexuality and I was like, oh my God. And a light bulb went on in my brain. And I was like, okay, so I'm gray asexual. And that's what I have been all this while. Um, to give another example, before Nandita shares hers, if any of you have seen Grey's Anatomy, there is a very distinct moment in seasons 3 or 4 where Erica Hahn, this doctor, has a light bulb moment uh, about her sexuality when she sleeps with a woman for the first time, and she wakes up the next morning and she's like, she compares that experience to when she got glasses for the first time and how the world just looks different. So that's what I mean by a light bulb moment. Nandita, what was yours?
So I think the first ever queer person that I befriended was Sina from my school, who was homosexual, and every time I would hang out, so I live in Delhi, and every time we would hang out in Connaught Place, I would just see them checking up their phone and opening Grinder and being very ready to hook up in the next half an hour or whenever our catch up session would get over. I would compare that to my own sexual experiences where I could not have anything, not even a hug or a kiss or holding hands with any random stranger. While I might find them cute and attractive, I'm just not going to be able to do anything intimate. And I think at that point of time, there was a lot of shame because I think at that point of time, I'm 25 right now. So when this happened in my early 20s, there was a lot of shame attached to people who could not do casual hookups. And they were looked down upon as if there was something, the wiring had gone off. And I remember I came across the term demisexual in an Instagram post. I mean, it's the biggest educator at the point in some aspects. So it was a ace person's handle, and that's where I came across the term demisexual, and it made a lot of sense. And it took some time for me to take pride and be able to say out loud on my dating profiles that I cannot have like I can't do anything casual. I need some sort of connection, some bonding, whether it develops over a day or over a couple of days, but that's a basic element that I need. Without that, any sort of intimacy is like food without salt for me, and it just doesn't go well. So I think that was my light bulb moment on a personal front.
Right. I also came across asexuality on the internet. So I want to know, have any of you, was any of your light bulb moment also associated with the internet? And if not, then I would still like to hear your moments. You can type them out in the chat box, or you can unmute yourselves and talk.
Mridula says the light bulb moment is very similar on Twitter.
Twitter.
Is it okay for people to like not have a light bulb moment?
Yes.
Because I feel like for me, it's always been going back and forth. Because the first time I found out about asexuality, I also remember feeling one sort of relief that, oh, there is a thing like this that exists. And also a disbelief that, oh shit, this is just going to be very, very difficult for me to like continue from here on, now that I've known that this exists. And I know that there are majority of people, literally like everybody who I knew back then did not know anything about that. So like there was disbelief and sadness, and also like happiness and relief that, okay, this exists, and I'm not, I'm not that different, but I'm not broken.
Yeah.
So, and then since then I've just been going back and forth. And yeah, so there's no light bulb moment there.
And that's absolutely okay. I mean, if I can say something, like I think even a light bulb moment, you're attaching a label to yourself, right, Katha? So if that label is something that you choose to carry with yourself, and if that label is something that's still it's marinating, it's not there yet, and that's perfectly all right, because at the end of the day, as a queer person, I only use labels that give me power and not drain me of it. And I think that's okay if not had a light bulb moment. That's perfectly all right.
Yes, absolutely. And
Yeah.
also a light bulb moment, it's not supposed to be something that you must celebrate. I think when I was speaking, that it came across as something that was always supposed to be happy, but it's not. It's what you want it to mean. So thank you for that.
It can be scary as fuck as well. I mean, the weight and the kind of systems that we're living in that are so acephobic. I mean, not choosing to have a light bulb moment also makes complete sense because of systematic failure, right?
Yeah.
So I think there are a couple of responses. I only
in the
opened
chat box. Yes.
Yeah. Vidya says my light bulb moment was an article about asexuality in newspaper. Vidya, which newspaper is this? I really want to know. SD says research on internet, even forum community chats made me realize I wasn't the only one. Yeah. Swapnil, on the internet, the demisexuality subreddit was very helpful, along with the friend's research paper. Long live such friends and such newspapers. Thank you so much, guys, folks. Okay, Gargi, I think we can talk about the awareness in the mental health.
Yeah. All right. So Nandita and I both graduated this year as masters in psychology, and we both, both of us, sorry, not we both of us got no formal training in asexuality. Firstly, that what is it, that it exists, that what asexual people experience, etc. Even though I was taught about how counseling with queer people is different than counseling with straight people. But asexuality was just never a part of it. One time when my teacher talked about the A in LGBTQIA, she thought it was a choice between ally and asexual, and I had to correct her like very patiently that it's not actually for allies, it's for asexual people and aromantic people. So there is virtually no training offered in formal education institutions at the bachelor level or at the master's level. There are courses run by institutions like organizations like the Mariwala Health organization that do queer affirmative therapy. But I mean, firstly, how many therapists can afford to do that course? And secondly, I don't think that covers 4 years of training. I mean, it should definitely be a part of the previous years also. Mridula is saying that 3 identities share the A, and everyone says a 4th one that isn't even clear. Exactly, yes.
I want to understand that joke.
What? A 4th one is an ally. It's not even clear.
So we're supposed to make space for allies in our acronym.
Yeah. So there are obviously consequences to therapists and mental health practitioners not knowing what asexuality is. And a major consequence is that the DSM-5 lists hypoactive sexual desire disorder as a whole disorder with symptoms and criteria. And right now it does have a segment added, which is that if this hypoactive sexual desire is not causing the person any distress, then it's not a disorder. But that's not enough, because being asexual can cause you distress because sexuality is expected of you, and that doesn't make it a disorder nonetheless. And this is not a thing that most professionals have not yet understood. And in academia, the scene is even worse, because when Nandita and I were doing our review of literature,
and mind you, we got to know each other only a month ago. So we both happened to do our thesis on the same goddamn topic without knowing each other, and our review of literature. Gargi, why don't you go and tell about that?
Is 70%, there's a 70% overlap in our review of literature. Even though her specific topic is very different from my specific topic, her method was very different. The conclusions that she reached were sort of different. And the only Indian paper that we found on asexuality is a bizarre rando case study that we had no choice but to include it, because there is simply nothing else available.
Can we come back to the workshop, please?
Yeah, we'll come back to the workshop.
Thank you.
So in terms of okay. So in terms of mental health training and spaces, like Gargi said, that there's not much material to work with. So I think that also means that as an ACE client, when you're trying to work with a therapist, it's very important that you understand that this is the kind of lack of training that they're coming from. So I think it's important to actually have your guards up in this situation, because what you're working with and what you might be working against is somebody who's not been trained to work with ACE folks. And most of the information lies around very allosexual concepts, and there is barely any awareness of what an ACE experience is. Right, so moving on. Okay, so we wanted to know what is the first ACE representation that you saw in popular media? The one that you can see in the background is Todd from BoJack Horseman, who made an ACE app. And if you can come up with any other representations that you might have seen in the media of an ACE character, or any character that you thought or could have inferred that is ACE, but the show really never talked about it at length. But the creators might have confirmed it later on. So Katha says ambiguous representation was Sherlock and Sheldon. Yeah. Sheldon. Probably Psyche K, but chronologically Bhishma from the Mahabharata. Oh, I didn't know about that. Thank you.
Oh, Reina? Reina is ACE? Oh my God, I had no idea.
What is SO?
Wow. How's Heroes of Olympus?
Okay. Right.
Okay.
So can I ask you, folks, if these representations were something that you had while growing up, or something that you sort of found in your adolescence or your 20s or your 30s? Meiji from Bloom into You and You as Demi. Very latest is Florence, but there's just very little out there for her character. Okay. So yeah, did you find these representations early on, or in your teens or your 20s or your 30s? Late 20s. Teens. Late 20s. Early 20s.
I think some of these characters we had to like genuinely go out there and look for.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they didn't like
Right.
happen in general how the heterosexual representation is there and just exists and it's like in your face. We actually have to look for these representations.
Absolutely. So you had to really dig deep in order to find a sense of belonging, because that's what media does, right? It provides you a sense of belonging. And for most ace people, they've seen your representations in their late teens or their early 20s or their late 20s for that matter, which means that there's not much ace, figures to look up to and be like, okay, this is what my life can pan out like, because that's the role of media. It gives you some sort of an idea or a template that this is what your life can pan out, or this is one of the possibilities. So while there are tons and tons of possibilities for how allosexual people navigate a date or a hookup or a marriage, or a polyamorous, not so polyamorous, a marriage, there's not much. I would say there's an immense depth of dearth of material when it comes to how does an ace person navigate a relationship. So I think this is the point that we sort of made it through, that there's barely any ace representations, and we can legit count on our fingers how many ace figures we've seen in the pop media. Okay, so yeah, Gargi, over to you.
Yeah. So we already covered some of this earlier when we were talking about how there is a almost total lack of awareness in mental health academia. But I want to ask you if you have ever come across if you've come across an article in a newspaper or a blog or a podcast or anything by mental health professionals talking about asexuality and that has helped you in any way. Or it could be, I mean, right now it could also be Instagram pages by mental health professionals who have done infographics on asexuality.
Yeah, Katha says no, not much.
Right. So hopefully Nandita and I can present key findings from our own research studies that will help you either locate your experiences or tell us that there is more variety than we got, than we saw in our sample. So both our participants, and please, I like keep talking in the chat box like Nandita. When I'm talking, Nandita will be keeping an eye on it. And when I am not speaking, I will be keeping an eye on it. And feel free to tell us your differences, if tell us your experiences if they are different than what I am saying. Yeah, so we found that our participants tended to externalize their race identity And by that, I mean, they tended to explain their asexuality with something else. For example, trauma or a traumatic experience, or sometimes their personality, or sometimes their gender, sometimes their introversion, and a host of other things, which was sometimes PCOS or other physiological issues, it is almost as if our participants believed that if that condition went away, whatever that X is that they are attributing their asexuality to, if that X went away, their asexuality would also go away and they would just be quote unquote normal. And by that we mean allo. Have any of you experienced this yourselves? Because I know I have. I try to attribute it to many things, like I was shy and I didn't like, it took me a while to be interested in sexual activity of any kind.
Yeah, and I think for me it was my CPTSD that I thought was making it difficult for me to just not be demisexual. Right, Vidya says, yes, I have tried to connect with my childhood trauma. Katha also agrees.
And I will just like add something here, that the whole point of sharing these findings is so that if you have experienced these things, then we want you to know that you are not alone, that this is something that many of us go through. And although I wouldn't want you obviously to externalize your asexuality, I want you to know that it's okay if you do that. You don't have to force yourself to do anything that you don't want to. Mridula is saying, I have, and whenever I think about it, I have to tell myself that's not healthy or necessary. Yes, it's not necessary. Correct.
Just adding to what Gargi said in my thesis, a couple of things that one did externalize or was told by a mental health professional to externalize was a personality disorder. So there is an category A of personality disorders in which the people who are diagnosed with it are usually avoidant, or do not like to interact much with people. And the diagnosis that some of the participants got was for a personality disorder, when in reality they were on the Ace spectrum. So there was an externalization that if this personality disorder is somehow treated or managed, the asexuality would not be present. And the idea here is that it's almost as if you're working with a system that's looking for that one thing that's wrong in your experience, so that once that is treated or fixed, that your A spectrum identity would somehow vanish. But I don't see the same thing being done to, heterosexual people, or even I would actually say heterosexual people. They don't have to defend. They don't have to justify their identities, saying that this and this happened and that is why I'm heterosexual. And that is there was a lot of anger and rage about this, as to why do we need to go through this, and why do we need to justify that there's some wrongness with our ace identities, right? So SD is saying that I did try to attribute it to maybe things that I've witnessed, heard, but eventually realized it does not matter if it's related or not. Absolutely. I mean, a lot of things, go into making who we are today. And who are we if all of those things are erased? I don't think there's much left in the picture. So I'm an ace and it's not going to change. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. It's very affirming. Right. Gargi, over to the next point.
Right. A lot of our participants found comfort and found that their experiences were better explained when they separated romantic and sexual orientations or romantic and sexual attractions, because it is just assumed in a world of compulsory sexuality that if you're romantically attracted to someone, it has to manifest sexually also. And I think for most ace people, this is simply not the case. We don't see romantic and sexual orientations as going hand in hand. they're not mutually exclusive, but they don't have to always go together. And sometimes they coincide, sometimes they don't. And making that distinction, understanding that there is a difference, helped participants navigate through their experiences much easier, because nothing around them ever told them that it's okay to simply be romantically attracted to somebody and not have sexual feelings for them. Yeah. Nandita, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so there were a couple of instances where participants mentioned that they would have a crush on somebody who was in their friend circle or in their school, but they never really wanted to, be a part of the whole raging hormones phase that a lot of teens have, that there's a lot of sexual attraction that develops. So they were like, I don't want to have sex or don't even want to kiss or touch this person. And yet I cannot take them out of my head. I keep thinking about them. I keep fantasizing about them. And I thought there's something so incomplete with me that while one of the part of the thing exists, like the love and the romance is there, the sex or the sexual attraction is not there. And I think that led to a lot of people who participated in my study feel very incomplete. Like there was some wiring that went off, that they got only one part of the deal and not the other. Yeah, so that was the case of my study. Yeah.
Okay, and the last one that I will be talking about is fear of loneliness and abandonment, because in a world of compulsory sexuality, you don't think that your relationship with an allosexual person will last long, because they will ultimately want something, that something being sex or sexual activity, and that you will not be able to give it to them. And this came up as a theme so prominently in all of my interviews and from my own life. And the moment you realize that this would simply not be an issue if we didn't assume that sex is the goal in all romantic relationships, and the fact that it is making asexual people fear that they will never find a partner who will fulfill their romantic needs, a partner whose romantic needs they will be able to fulfill, romantic or even sexual, platonic, any needs that they will be able to fulfill. And that compulsory sexuality is making these people believe that they are not enough, that something is wrong with them and they are lacking, I am keeping a very neutral face right now, but I am raging inside. Yeah. And this also came up from it was not just a fear that came out of nowhere. It was because people did love them and were in a relationship with them and then ended up leaving because they wanted sex, and my participants either didn't want sex or didn't want sex the same way that their partners did. And yeah.
So just adding on to that and moving on to the second half, there were cases where somebody tried to coerce the participants and say like, oh, you haven't tried this, let us try this position, or they maybe try doing it when we're drunk and that might make it easier. So there were very, very subtle forms of coercion. And when the client was, therapist, okay, when the participant was not comfortable and decided to put things to an end, or could not take it anymore, and the other person sort of gaslit the participants saying that it's because of you not being able to do this that I'm choosing to leave you. And that in itself further intensified that fear of loneliness and abandonment. Absolutely, when you're drunk you can't really give a consent, and that's exactly what my participants would tell them, but there was not much heed paid to that, because the other person was trying to fix something, like why is this person not wanting to have sex with me. Is it also sort of takes up on your fragile self concept, that is there something wrong with me that this person does not want to have a sexual relationship with me. It's personalized, and when it's personalized, in a lot of cases it's tried to be challenged. because once you personalized it, you're like, this is all about me. This is not about you not wanting it. This is about you not wanting it with me. And that sort of resulted in a lot of struggles for my participants in romantic relationships. Right. So we look at now the some of the parts that emerged in my studies. One was impact of sex positive movement. Now we've realized that there's a sort of sex positive movement that's going all around us, where there's a lot of contraception available. There's condoms that are more easily accessible, and slowly there are also companies that are local Indian companies that are starting to come up with sex toys and a ton of other things. And I know about very underground BDSM groups as well, where the whole thing is taught and very ethically and with consent. So I think somewhere I feel the message got lost that in the sex positive movement, that the idea is not to have people do more and more of sex. The idea is for people to build a relationship with sex, the kind of relationship they want. And this means that if you choose not to have sex, and that's the choice that you make, that in itself needs to be a part of the movement as well, that there's nothing wrong with not wanting sex or wanting sex very few times in your life with very specific people. And I think that's really the message that came in the study, was that message was lost in the whole movement, that everything will become about trying to feel whole because of sex, but you were never broken in the first place. Taking this from Dr. G. Milgram from the sex education series.
Right. I want to add to this point, which is the feminist movement sort of consciously, unconsciously, or a part of the feminist movement, or whatever you call it, associated women's liberation with the liberty to have more sex. And that is not necessarily true. And the next wave of feminists that came had to, even they didn't actually realize, it was the asexual feminist women who realized that our liberation has nothing to do with the freedom to have sex. We don't want to have sex. And personally, I think when I read about this, it resonated with me a lot, because politically, I was told that in order to be a good feminist, I should be having emotionally detached sex, because that's what men do. And I want to take that power from them. All the while, personally, I was like, I don't want this. And it can be tricky to navigate this situation. So if any of you are going through this or have gone through this, then I see you. We got this.
Right. Now coming to the second last finding is gender and age spectrum. I think, the Gargi, you were mostly working with cis women, right, in your study?
What, sorry?
You were working mostly with cis women.
Cis women, yeah. I was only working with cis women.
Right. So in mine, there was no gender specification. Anybody and everybody on the age spectrum was welcome to the study. And one of the things that really came forward is people who were cis male presenting at the time, who might have changed their gender identities later. If they were cis male presenting and happened to be, growing up in a convent school or an all boys school, the isolation of being ace was even further, because male atmospheres were very hypersexualized. That everything was about getting a chick, trying to get her laid, talking about that experiences with your guy friends and trying to boast about it. And that is where some of my participants felt really left out. And they were like, it was so difficult to survive in that hypersexualized environment, 8 hours of your day, also having friends from that same environment come back to your home and be around. And the constant message that you're getting is that, dude, we're doing it all right. There's something has to be wrong with you. If 9 out of 10 people want to have sex with that woman and you don't, there has to be something wrong with you. And I think gender really plays a role. Whereas if a participant was a cis female or a cis female was presenting at that time, it wasn't much of a debate, because women's sexual desires have been sort of suppressed for so long that if a woman is not wanting to have it's okay, because I mean, we're in the 21st century. While there's tons and tons of male Viagra, I still don't see dental dams and female Viagra being accessible in chemists or even being made. So I think there's the whole systematic injustice where when men are on the A spectrum, it's a very big problem. When women are on the A spectrum, it's not so much of a big deal, because I mean, who gives a damn about a woman's pleasure? And the last thing was reframing A spectrum. So one of the things that came up during the study was that, and I'm going to put it like it was put to me, is that the beauty of the A spectrum is that it has so much space for nuance. It has so much space to accommodate such nuanced lived experiences. For instance, the idea that while I can orgasm while masturbating, I'm not able to, or I don't want to orgasm with a partner. Something as, I think I'm getting goosebumps when I say this, but it shows how much of space the spectrum has for such diverse lived experiences, and to offer them space and to come up with a label that is validated across. And I think that is how some of the participants were able to reframe their spectrum experience. Right. So now, based on what we've shared, Gargi and I want to know if you folks are comfortable talking about any of the points that you might have experienced that we talked about while you're questioning and your coming out journey, or anything else that might have come up to you during these experiences with your friends, your family, your peers, or anybody, or within your own self as well. And feel free to unmute yourself, please.
Hi, Divya here.
Hi,
Sorry, I
Divya.
haven't been to participate because I've had to attend this on my phone because my laptop didn't stop working. I had a question, which is that, and it's also connected to my own experience. So there are all these different types of attraction that I've experienced in life. And what I happen to have done is that I just, because of the way I saw it portrayed in culture, I just thought that that is sexual attraction, or like the way I saw it on, let's say, a TV show or a movie. Because naturally, there is no way to portray or to show what sexual attraction looks like. It's almost entirely a feeling, a subjective one. So I just wanted to understand, like, or just wanted a general opinion on this, that how does someone know what sexual attraction looks like if they are, as we've discussed, asexual, in that they don't probably never experienced it? How do they even know what the concept of sexual attraction is? And especially if I'm a young person who is unaware of what sex even looks or feels like. I'm unknown to the concept, right? So how do I differentiate between these other forms of attraction? Like, for example, even an intellectual attraction that I might experience towards someone can feel like a romantic thing sometimes, right? So it's very confusing. Attraction can be very confusing. So what are your thoughts on that? That's my question.
Gargi, would you like to take that up?
In a book I'm reading right now on asexuality, one of the people that the author spoke to has exactly the experience that you are going through, that they don't know what sexual attraction looks like. And the conclusion that they reached over the course of like their life up until the point that they were interviewed was that, so they're able to feel platonic love, they're able to feel romantic love, but they don't feel sexual attraction. And so the only way they explain it to themselves or to other people is that it's one kind of attraction that they don't know what it feels like. Like, they explain it with a negative, that's something that I don't feel, that's all. And I have no idea how to explain it to you other than what I just said. So Nandita.
Right. So if Divya, you and I were to have a conversation, and I think it's a very valid question, because if you're saying that you're not something, or that something doesn't work for you, I think it is important to know what that something is before you say that this is what I'm canceling out, this is not my deal. And I think while I don't think there's an objective idea. I don't think there's a whole universal idea, because across culture as well, the understanding of sex, of romance varies. And I feel that at that point of time, if I were to be in your shoes, I think I would try and stick with my own lived experience first and see what it brings to me, because I am somebody who's a very experiential learner. I trust more than my own experiences more than I trust a lot of spaces online or books and all, because I think experiences came first and then came all these resources. The conversation happened first, and I think the books about that conversation came way later. So I think I don't feel what you asked is a tricky question, because the amount of uncertainty that brings to me is something that's discomforting, because how do you say what's sex? So I think I would say that if I were you, I would try to stick to my own subjective understanding and then find people who are able to hold space to validate and acknowledge what is the understanding that I carry. I think that would be something that I would do. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's starting to help me understand this, because I've questioned a lot of the attraction that I've experienced towards people in general. Like, and there are a lot of emotional, social, cultural, I mean, so many things involved, right? I mean, for example, when we go to therapy also, we discover patterns in the kind of attractions that we've generally experienced. I'm not even talking about relationships, talking about attraction. Because for me, so many of my relationships probably didn't even reach the relationship phase, because I could not get past the attraction phase in a healthy way to even understand what kind of attraction this meant. And I may have found myself gravitating to a specific type of people, but then that's extremely broad, which is why I asked about what it is not. And but I understand that that's difficult to answer, because we all experience it differently. But can I just say that I'm not sexually attracted to someone when I don't immediately want to or imagine that I want to have sex with them? I know that's a very banal way of putting it, but is that like a
yes, that's exactly it, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
I'm going to differ on that, because I don't imagine myself in bed.
No, because I think I'm gray that way, right? Because there are people who I might want to have sex with, but I don't think of it right away at the very outset. I might think of it after a while, after I have conversations. I mean, it's very complex, which is, yeah.
If I were to say I have a certain tingling sensation around my vulva, and that's where I feel, okay, there's something going on here, there's some chemistry. And I think the way all of us sort of see it is different. And I think if there's anything I can sort of leave you for this question is, I think, Divya, I really hope that you find people who are able to understand and validate the kind of experiences and definitions that you sort of carry, and are able to sort of hold your hand and be like, we'll figure this out together. Because I don't think that a lot of us talk about how do we experience romance or sex. And I think that's one question that I'm going to take back from this whole thing, that how do I customize it for myself? And I think that's a very important question to ask. So thank you so much for that.
No, thank you for your answers. This has been a great workshop. Thank you.
Right. So would anyone of you would talk about any of the points that we mentioned earlier as a part of the study that you might have come across or gone through, or anything else that you would like to bring to the table?
Hello, my name is Vidya.
Hi, Vidya.
Hi, Vidya.
I've the topic of feeling lonely and abandonment is really have been felt in many of the relationships I had, even with friends or partners, as per se. That is like in both cases, many of them are very interested in relationships, but they couldn't relate it to me, and always made me realize that there has been some problem with me internally. Or there might be this issue of this childhood trauma I had been through. So yes, that point has took me home. I'd say. Thank you.
You're welcome, and thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Would anyone else like to share next? Okay, Karti, I think we're a little bit on time, so we're just going to. Okay.
Okay. All right. So, what are your rights as a mental health client and as an ACE person when you're working with a mental health practitioner? One of the things that you can do is ask if the practitioner themselves is ACE, if that's something that you're comfortable with. You can also ask them what if they have ever worked with an ACE client before, what has that experience been like? And you don't need to know who that client was, what their concerns were, etc., because your practitioner is not going to break confidentiality, but you can ask them what the practitioner's experience was of working with an ACE client. This does a couple of things. One, it tells you if the practitioner is comfortable with working with ACE clients, because most likely asexuality makes them question their own beliefs about gender and sexuality. And if they are comfortable with working with ACE clients, then that tells you that they're non-judgmental towards ACE people, that they are accepting of ACE experiences, that they are willing to look at you as a whole person beyond your asexuality, including your asexuality. You can ask, you can also ask your practitioner if they know what asexuality is. And you can look at what sort of response they give you when you mention the word asexuality, and we'll come to this in a bit. Other than this, you can straight up ask the practitioner that I'm an ACE client and I have these concerns, and I feel like my sexuality has something to do with some of these concerns, if that's the case, and see what they respond with. Because ideally, you want someone who will understand how your asexuality intersects with your other identities, and it shapes how you look at the world and what sort of treatment you get in the world. And it is your right as a client to find a practitioner who understands what it's like, whether they have a certificate in queer affirmative therapy, or if they are coming from lived experience, or if they are coming from experiential learning. That's that's for you to decide what you prefer, but these are places that your practitioner can come from, and it is 100% your right to have a practitioner who knows what asexuality is, what asexual experiences look like, and what asexuality, like where asexuality exists in this world. Yeah.
Okay. Also, when to do this is a one thing that we wanted to talk about was, so when you're working with private practitioners, they usually have a short call with you, at least the ones that I've interacted with, or you could request for one. And most of the times this is unpaid, because we're just seeing whether the therapist and the client are a good fit. And there's no charge for that because the therapy is not started yet. So some of the questions they might ask you is, what are the concerns that you want to work with? And there's a talk of availability, what dates and times work for you. And this is the point at which you can bring up that if there's something to do with your ACE identity that you want to work with, this is where all the questions that Gargi brought up can be asked. And if you're working with an organization, I don't think, at least at the alternative story, every session is counted. So there's no call to see if you're a good fit for me or I'm a good fit for you. Even during the first session that you take up, I think it's very, very important to acknowledge that if there's resistance coming up where there is a lack of trust on the practitioner, I think I supremely welcome it in my sessions, because I don't think the world has given ACE people enough reasons to trust them. And that's all right. And especially when we're telling you that the language piece is really alarming, I think it's good to have your guards up. It's good to be resistant and good to ask questions till you start trusting this place, this person, and this space. Because therapy is not, you'll see a lot of therapists saying, "Oh, this is a safe space." And I think my personal opinion of that is that idea of safety varies from person to person. So I cannot say that this is a safe space without trying to understand what is your idea, what is your experience of safety. And I think I can only try to make it a safe space from my idea of safety and what I've understood of yours. At the end of the day, I think just because I'm a therapist, by the virtue of that, any space doesn't become safe. And that's all right if you're feeling any sort of alarming things. I feel it's very important that you can just leave the session or ask them to cut the session, because if it's getting too overwhelming, there's no need to stay for the rest of the session. And if you feel that you want to educate your therapist about what went wrong, please do that. But if you're not in the space, I would say the onus is not on you, especially as a minority, as somebody who's less, like, who doesn't have the privilege. I think it's not on you to educate your MHP. That's something your MHP needs to be doing. But if you have the bandwidth, you have the intent, and you want to share your experiences or some sort of knowledge with your mental health practitioner who has not much idea of Ace spectrum, then it's okay. That's that they need to go back and do their homework. You cannot keep going back and lecturing your therapist as to what Ace spectrum is, going into the history, because you're not there for that. And that's not therapy. So I think that's really important to know that as a mental health user. Also, please ensure that there's enough space to give feedback to your therapist, because that is a tool that is going to be coming extremely handy. So make sure that your therapist has some space for feedback sessions, where there's a consolidated feedback apart from the immediate feedback, where you can bring out your concerns. Right. So we're now going to do a green flag and red flag. Gargi, I was wondering if we could ask them what they think are some of the red flags first.
Yes.
So what are some of the red flags in a mental health practitioner? Since I think there was a lot of discussion on the panel as well.
Have any of you had any kind of experiences with a therapist where you have come out to your therapist and their response was either what you wanted or what you absolutely did not want and did not make you feel good about yourself, did not make you feel safe in the therapeutic environment? Or if you haven't had an experience yet, then what does it look like in your head? What would it look like if I were to tell you to imagine an experience where you came out to your therapist? Now, how would they respond ideally?
Okay. Vidya says yes, not exactly came out, but casually mentioned it. And okay, if I'm reading, okay, they said that Vidya was broken.
Okay, that's a red flag for sure.
It's a very heavy word to you. I'm sorry you had to go through that, Vidya.
Yeah. Okay, should we go ahead and discuss it? Okay, so I'll go through the red flags first. One is Vidya said, invalidating your identity, not addressing it in sessions when you want to address it, when the concern is clearly has something to do with your asexuality, or simply when you want to. Invalidating, erasing, dismissing, trivializing that part of your identity is definitely a red flag. Externalizing it as a personality disorder, like Nandita mentioned before, or as an attachment style. If they say that, oh no, you're not asexual, you just have an avoidant attachment style. That's not okay. Explaining it away as maybe you're depressed and that's why you have a low sex drive, and therefore if we cure the depression, that will cure your asexuality. That's not okay. That is also a red flag. Or any other general mental health concern, like even if it is anxiety, whether it is depression, whether it is anything, any other concern that you are experiencing. Attributing it to trauma is also not okay.
Disability.
Or any disability, intellectual or physical. None of this means that you can't be asexual. You can be both those things at the same time. And also straight up calling asexuality a disease and asking if that is giving you distress, because that's a criterion in the DSM-5. Those are all red flags that you should stay away from and be concerned about if that happens in the session, because I don't want to sound like alarmist or anything, but that is definitely something to look out for. Now, green flags, which means that when your therapist is affirmative of your asexuality, is holding space for your asexuality, for your identity, exploring it when you want to, being curious about it, if that's the first conversation you are having, having a overall non-judgmental attitude, but also a non-judgmental attitude specifically towards your asexuality, and accepting it as your reality and truth. And because asexuality looks different for everyone, if they know one definition and one version of it, and you don't happen to fit into that definition, they are willing to know what your reality looks like and what asexuality looks like for you. They let you define it for yourself. They use something called reflection of meaning, which we are actually taught, not with respect to asexuality, but as a concept and as a skill to use, which is when we use, we don't simply paraphrase what you said to us, but we say it back to you in a way that adds meaning or gives you a different perspective to what you just said or about the event that you narrated. And yeah.
Hold on. So reflection of meaning is basically a way in which your therapist asks you, okay, you talk about, let's just say, Divya, I'm going to take up your example. So Divya says that I do not feel sexually attracted to X and Y, right? So the therapist could say that reflection of meaning would be asked Divya to reflect on, what does sexual attraction mean to Divya? And the idea is it lets the client take the power to decide what sexual attraction looks like to them, because it's a very varied experience. And any therapist needs to work with your unique lived experiences and not stick to objective understanding of something. So it's important that we work with that. And also, I think one of the red flags would be if your client says that gives you a certain label, right, that you're broken, that you're damaged, or that you're incomplete, or it's a disorder, and gives you absolutely no reason as to why they're using that and leaves you completely in the dark. That's an absolute big red flag, because they're assuming that you already know that what a schizoid personality or what a personality disorder is. So even if it's a trashy, triggering, dismissive, and a discounting label, if they're not even explaining that, I think it goes on to show that the power play is such that the therapist always knows better than you. And I think that's a very, very big red flag in that situation. Yes, I think we're done with the red and the big flags, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's comics time. Gargi had shared this comic that she found on Twitter. So I'm going to go over the slides. And Gargi, any idea how I zoom into this?
Zoom, I don't know. Maybe I can read it.
Slideshow. Yes. Is the text
All of you
visible?
read.
Is the text visible?
It's visible to me, but is it? Yeah, okay.
You can read it also, Gargi.
I'll read it out loud.
So
So,
it's by Katie Green, right?
yeah.
Okay, go on.
So this is by Katie Green. I came across this comic on Twitter. And the first panel says, how do I explain that an orientation defined by a lack is not lacking? I get tired of hearing asexuality defended. Ace people can still love. Ace people can still have sex. Ace people can still have children. Even though all these things may be true, it ends up sounding like asexuality is a shortcoming, which it isn't, unless you position human relationships in a hierarchy of importance with sex at the very top, and the hierarchy goes sex, spouse, partner, date, best friends, friends, family, colleagues, acquaintances, strangers, and the dog saying, what about me? So from there, from the top of that hierarchy, of course, asexuality looks like a lack, but that's not seeing the whole picture, because the whole picture looks like this. So that was the comic, and that is what we had planned for all of you. If you have any questions, sharings, any kind of feedback for us, please let us know either in the chat box or like by unmuting yourselves.
Yeah. This is the first time we're doing something of this sort, so feedback would be really helpful. Any areas of strength or any areas where we can improve. If you have the space and the energy to get that. Yeah, the comic is very lovely. It's by Katie Green, right?
Yes.
I'm just putting
I'm also leaving the names of 2 books that I read where the protagonist is asexual.
Also, I just had one thing, that I'm a part of an Ace Arrow support group on Telegram. So if any of you would like to be joining there, I think you can drop me an email and I will make sure that you're added to that Telegram group. So it's for both Ace and Arrow people. Absolutely, Vrudula. I think it's important to understand that as a therapist, I'm here because you're there as a client and that you're willing to trust me with your vulnerability and with your lived experiences. Without that, I'm not a therapist. And I think the equation needs to value as much as a client as much as it does for a therapist. And I think while the therapist can have some sort of expertise in terms of psychological knowledge and labeling and all the jargon, I think the client is the final decision maker when it comes to what their lived experiences looks like. And that is your say in a therapeutic relationship. Yeah. Oh, I'm glad the red flags and the green flags could help. Oh, thank you so much, Vidya. Thank you. Okay, Neha, should we close? I think we've ended a bit early. That's all.
All right, lovely having you both. Thank you so much, Nandita and Gargi, for facilitating this session. I think there were a lot of things that helped people and will continue to help them as they watch this video later as well. Great collaborating with you. And thank you for being a part of PanACEa 2021.
Thank you so much for having us, Dr. Pragitna. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks, everybody. The next session that we have will start at 6 p.m. Please go get some rest, and we'll be back at 6 with Dwight Cook, who talks about leading with pride. Bye.
Okay. Bye.